y'all, I'm Lulu, and you're watching Call Me Lulu. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about some of my favorite reads and try and accomplish my writing dreams. As you might be able to tell by my attire, the spooky season is upon us, and in this video I wanted to share some of the books that I've been reading to celebrate the spooky season. The first book that I read this all the way back in September, was The Hollow Places by Kingfisher. I heard about this on the YouTube channel It's Bells, which I don't think is super active anymore, but if she comes back I would be super excited. The channel was lovely. And she described this as like Gravity Falls for adults, and I love Gravity Falls. I have had people compare me to Mabel Pines before, and I think it's incredibly flattering. And yeah, I just love like the creativity that series has and how like beautifully crafted it is. And so I was excited to pick this book up. It follows Kara, who is recently divorced. She's a graphic designer and she's going to help her uncle, who runs like a curiosities museum in North Carolina. I was also really excited to pick it up because I have a lifelong phobia of taxidermy. I've been afraid of it since before I can remember, really. I think one of my earliest memories is like seeing a taxidermied gorilla that was on exhibit at like an Illinois state fair or county fair. And just like having a meltdown. I think I was like 2 or 3. But I've always been scared of taxidermy, and I can be kind of hard to scare. So I thought, like, there's taxidermy in this museum, I will be scared. I was also excited because I did work as an undergraduate research assistant at the paleontology lab for my university for like 2.5 years. When I was doing my BA, and I really enjoyed working there, and I cataloged a lot of like fossils and bones. I love bones, by the way. I'm scared of taxidermy, but I love bones. But I cataloged like fossils and bones for like 15-20 hours a week for like 2.5 years. And in this, Kara, the main character, is cataloging specimens for her uncle. And the specimens are of these kind of like pseudo-archaeological, like pseudo-paleontological like artifacts. And I was just really excited to read about that because that's something I'm like incredibly interested in. I don't know if y'all have seen the YouTube channel Minute Man, but he talks about like different aspects of pseudo-archaeology. And I find that really fun. So I also thought, and that's also an aspect of Gravity Falls that I really loved. So I thought that this book was kind of gonna live up to it as well. I've also been meaning to read like Kingfisher. She's like a Hugo Award-winning horror writer, and I was like really excited for it. It didn't live up to my expectations, I have to say. It was kind of like, this like isn't a spoiler because it's on the back cover. But when Kara goes to help her uncle, and she goes to this kind of like mystery shack type place in North Carolina, that's actually not where most of the book is set. Like the back of the book says, an opening that impossibly leads Kara and her new friend Simon to a sprawling area that can't be part of North Carolina's plane of existence. As they explore the apparently limitless depths of this bizarre and frightening new world, a hub containing portals to alternate realities, they bear witness to its cryptic warnings. So I guess I did not take the back of this book seriously enough. Kara and Simon find a hole in the wall, and in this like Narnia-esque way, go off into a portal to another incredibly scary world. So this book does not actually take place in like a mystery shack in North Carolina. It takes place in kind of like a scary Narnia type place. It felt very like, maybe like Dante inspired. And like, I think if that was what you came for, that was very well done. I, however, came for scary taxidermy and pseudoarchaeology, and I did not get much of that. I think overall, for me, it was fine, but I think if you want scary Narnia, first read the Magician series by Lev Grossman, and then come back and read this one, because I think it's a very well done version of that. Next, I read Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This collection explores different aspects of the female experience through the lens of like horror and twisted fairy tales and twisted campfire stories. This collection was Machado's debut collection, and it was nominated for the National Book Award. I think it was actually a finalist for the National Book Award. So whatever I'm about to say, know that I'm the one who's wrong, because I did not super enjoy this collection. And I want to add that Carmen Maria Machado is also a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she's a Guggenheim Fellow, so like, if this book sounds good while I describe it, it definitely is. It wasn't for me, which doesn't mean that I don't want to talk a lot about it, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't read it, if it sounds nice. I heard about this collection because I read the first story in it, The Husband Stitch, for 2 separate creative writing classes, and while I didn't love the story, I could tell that it was like so necessary and so interesting. The Husband Stitch uses the lens of the story of like Jenny with the green ribbon, that like story that we all had in our like first grade classrooms that was like unnecessarily terrifying, to kind of like talk about the way that the stories that are told in our culture and that kind of like pervade the way that children are brought up normalize violence against women. And I thought that was a really cool concept. And it also like experiments with form in a certain way. I feel like it like resists kind of being told what to do or like what stories are supposed to do. It shoots off in a bunch of different little like journeys and talks about like different stories that like the narrator has been told in a very like stream of consciousness, like yellow wallpaper type way. And I didn't love it, but I thought that I could love something like it, and I wanted to like explore it a little bit more, so I picked this up. But of course, like my feelings about the collection were somewhat similar to my feelings about the story itself. I could tell how necessary and how like timely the stories were, but I didn't find myself connecting to them all that much. I think the longest story in the collection, which is actually kind of a novelette, encompasses how I felt about like the collection as a whole. In the longest story, Especially Heinous, it's told through a series of synopses of like fantastical SVU episodes. And I think that's really fitting for this collection and how I feel about it, because in a way, I feel like the collection as a whole sacrifices depth for breadth. I think it's really fitting that instead of being one long story, the longest story is one narrative that just describes a bunch of different stories that could have happened. The stories in this collection explore different aspects of violence against women. The Husband Stitch explores the way that the stories that permeate our culture normalize violence against women. In Especially Heinous, it is showing the way that like using violence against women as a part of entertainment, like, devalues women. And in Mother, which draws from Machado's own life, it talks about how, like, domestic violence can exist and look even in, like, women loving women relationships. And in Invisible Women, Machado examines the way that the fashion industry sends messages that women need to shrink their bodies and to be small, and how that erasure, like, does harm. I feel like any one of these topics was, like, strong enough to, like, organize a collection around, and in the inclusion of, like, all of them, something gets lost. I read one review for this collection that said that Machado's stories seemed like drops on a pond, and I think I really agree with that. Like, it does seem like it's like raindrops on a pond where, like, you get scattered glimpses of so many different things versus, like, one kind of, like, concentrated push. That said, I really did love all of the aspects of this collection that do carry through. In Especially Heinous, there is a season arc of Detective Benson being haunted by girls with bells for eyes that I really loved. And I think other aspects that, like, go throughout the entirety of the collection, like the penultimate story, The Resident, is like Machado diving into, like, metafiction almost, where a narrator who is a writer with, like, the same initials as Machado is at a writing retreat or at a writing residency in, like, a rural cabinish spooky setting and is writing, like, horror stories while there. And when you see that as, like, being in dialogue with the first story, The Husband Stitch, where this woman is a victim of all of the stories that people have been told, I think it is a story of, like, women taking control of, like, this narrative of how they are seen, right? Because, like, one is this woman whose life has been shaped passively by the stories that she's been told about what women are and what women do, and by what other people have been told. And then in the second to last story, you have this writer who is actively, like, writing this book, which, you know, is setting out to, like, shape the, like, depiction of womanhood into something different, something more like they see it, and that, like, fits their own experiences. So I thought that was really cool. But just overall, I didn't find them connected enough. My favorite story in this collection was 8 Bites, which is, like, a fantastical exploration on, like, one woman's journey through, like, having bariatric surgery. And I really connected to that one. I read it twice, actually. And by the end of it, I did feel motivated to, like, have compassion for my body, or to practice compassion for my body, which is something that's, like, often so difficult for me that I, like, give up sometimes. So, like, the fact that it could motivate me again, I think, is very powerful. I also really just didn't jive with, like, the prose style of this book. I like really ambiguous prose, but I like ambiguous prose that's, like, created, where the ambiguity is created through brevity, like, through things being omitted. Like, if you think of, like, Kafka's Metamorphosis, like, where the first line is just, like, Gregor Samsa woke up and found that he was a giant bug. And you're like, what? What the heck, Kafka? Like, what's going on? And he's like, whatever, it's fine. Just go with it. And does not explain it. I think stuff like that, like, delights me to no end. But here, Machado creates ambiguities through describing things that seem to be in juxtaposition with one another or seem to be unrelated. And I'll read you, like, an example or two. I look down at the baby who stares at me with wide eyes that shimmer like Japanese beetles. You know, and you're like, how are these two things related? I don't know. Or Benson sticks her hand deep into the turkey's guts. Her fingers push through gristle and meat and bones. Out of the turkey comes a string of entrails on which are suspended tiny bells. Slick with blood, the meal is a great success. So you're like, oh, how did bells wind up in the turkey? How do the baby's eyes look like Japanese beetles? And that kind of like ambiguity I don't love as much, where I'm like connecting these things, but I also think that like Machado is like deliberately trying to go against the idea of being brief or like minimalist. She wants like you to feel like women can be verbose. So things I feel like are just like worded very descriptively, in a way that just like I believe in. I think she's right. And I think it's really good that this like exists, but I don't think it resonated with me in the way that I wanted it to. Next, I read The Ghost of Fossil Glen by Cynthia de Felice. I talked about this one a little bit in my middle grade books video, but I want to talk about it a little more extensively here. It was published in 1998. It is a middle grade novel. It follows 12-year-old Allie, or I think she's 11. 11-year-old Allie, who is trying to find her way in her 6th grade class, and 12-year-old Dub, who would be played by a young Dule Hill, just like a very smart, witty, little bit blunt. Allie likes collecting fossils, which I very much relate to, and while collecting trilobites, she hears the disembodied voice of a ghost, and Allie and Dub attempt to help the ghost be laid to rest through solving a mystery that's been hanging over the town for a while, and also by preserving the local wildlife area and saving it from a Scooby-Doo style evil real estate developer. I first read this book when I was in the 2nd grade and I loved it. I loved the atmosphere. It has like kind of a really creepy vibe, but like not too scary, like kind of creepy but not too scary. And I loved like that the character liked collecting fossils. I too loved collecting fossils, or like rocks. There weren't a lot of fossils around where I lived, so I collected like cute looking rocks that I sometimes called fossils, like in a ravine, kind of like Allie. I also got a really good scare from it when I was in the 2nd grade, and I think that's like even truer now. I think like it's hard for me to be scared by things sometimes, because I think I'm sometimes just confused by things that are supposed to make you scared. Like, you know, like in like a horror movie, you'll see like a character make like a really weird decision and I'll be like, oh, I wonder why they did that, rather than like, no. But like, because these protagonists are children, it really got to me. Because like, you're not like, oh, I wonder why they make that decision. You're like, oh no, I know why they're making that decision. Like, they don't have a frontal lobe, they're vulnerable. So like one of these, the characters in this book does like a really like brave, but like incredibly risky thing. And you just like, you know, it's not gonna like end well for them. And like that scared me. But overall, I think if you were a kid who liked rocks, or like a grown-up who likes rocks, and you like to read children's literature or YA, I would recommend this book for like a spooky season one. However, and this is a big however, I was so confused because Fossil Glen is not a Glen. Characters in this book constantly refer to people like Fossil Glen being dangerous. They're being like people who fall from Fossil Glen and die. And I was so confused, y'all, because like a glen is like a gently sloped valley between two hills. Like imagine like what you imagine Ireland being, that's a glen. Okay, I was like, how are these people like falling down and dying in a glen? Like how clumsy are these townspeople? However, they do not mean a glen when they say a glen. They mean a ravine. A ravine being like a steep set of cliffs above a river or above a valley. A glen being a gently sloped set of cliffs above a valley. Yeah, they mean a ravine. They say it's like a 200-foot cliff. So just like if you're reading this, keep that in mind, because I was so confused, y'all. Then I read The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander, which is the first book in the Chronicles of Prydain series. It was published in 1964. And if you have seen the Disney movie The Black Cauldron, it is based off of this book. This story follows Taryn, an assistant pig keeper for Henwin, an oracular pig, so she can see the future. Taryn hates being a pig keeper and he wants to do something heroic with his life. But then Henwin goes missing and he is tasked with finding her. And Taryn and the readers come to learn that he is not the only one in pursuit of Henwin. The Horned King, Disney's literal greatest villain, and his army of cauldron-born skeleton soldiers are also after Henwin, and they're trying to get to Taryn. And we follow Taryn's journey of trying to reunite with Henwin and keep her safe. I wanted to read this book because I love the Disney movie, even though it is like objectively bad. But the Horned King is the reason I have these antlers on. Because he is like, even in the original like Welsh myth, he's depicted with like antlers rather than like horns. It's just like people call him the Horned King. But I love the Disney movie. It is not good. It was made like late 70s at a very low point in like Disney's life, and it almost bankrupted Disney single-handedly. It was also almost the first R-rated animated movie ever. And Tim Burton, while he was still an intern, was employed on this movie, and he was fired because people thought his character designs were too weird. It was just like, I love everything that the movie went through. I love what a disaster it was, and I legitimately have considered writing a book about the production of that movie. So I was super excited to read this book. I also like really love the way that it's like rooted in place. I love that it's like based off of Welsh mythology. So I had high expectations for it, and I think it met those completely. I loved this book. The way that it's like tied to place and to like Welsh folklore is really evident. The prose is that like perfect mix of like brief and expressive. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I plan to read the rest of the series very soon. And the last book that I've read so far in the spooky season is Averno by Louise Glück. This collection was released by Louise Glück, who won the Nobel Prize for poetry not too long ago and actually passed last October. This was her collection, which she released in 2006, and it follows not only like the narrator of the series or the narrator of the collection, who is like presumed to kind of be the poet herself, and it kind of like merges point of views with Persephone of like the classical myth, who is preparing to like dive back into the underworld, while the poet speaker is kind of like preparing to delve back into the depression of the winter months. This is not necessarily spooky, but it is autumnal, and I think it would resonate. And it's like very autumnal. This is not me just trying to like squeeze my favorite like work of poetry like into a video. It's like the title of the first poem in this series is called October, and it is like charting like Persephone's journey through the autumn. So it fits in this video kind of, but I think that this collection would resonate with anybody who has like seasonal affective disorder or finds like a chronic illness getting worse in the winter months, and like knowing every year that you have to prepare for that. It resonates a lot with me, and I've been reading it every October, goodness, since I was like 14, 15, I think maybe 15. So, yeah, like, is that 12 years? My goodness, 11 or 12 years. Yeah, it's just incredible. I have 2 copies of this. I have one that's inside Louise Glück's collected works, and then I have this one that's just like a hardback copy of the collection by itself. And both of them are so worn. When I say I read this every October, that is not the only time of year that I read this. I read it so often. In fact, I think the last time I read over it was maybe 2 months ago. But yeah, I like to like look back at my copy particularly because like I never had a Tumblr, but I did have my entire Tumblr phase like inside this collection. Like here, inside the dust jacket, there's a little note on notebook paper that I wrote in purple pen for anyone who borrows it, just talking about how I want the book to be treated and like my thoughts on the book in case anybody wants to read them. And then I wrote Property of Ransom on the inside, which is like one of my names, but it's not usually the one that I go by, but I like thought it was edgy. So I wrote Ransom, and then if you look on this title page, it says, "Facile is the descent for Persephone wandering half in love with death." And I wrote little like notes like that all inside the book when I was like a teenager, and I think it's really cute. But I'll read some of her words instead of just reading mine. This is the beginning of the first poem called October. It's a wonderful poem. It was actually published as a chapbook, so like by itself, if you want to read it that way. A few of my favorite lines in it that I've highlighted right here. "My body has grown cold like stripped fields. Now there is only my mind, cautious and wary." I'll let the camera focus. "Now there is only my mind, cautious and wary, with the sense that it is being tested." And the collection actually starts in a way that I think would definitely resonate for anyone who's had like seasonal depression. "It is winter again, it is cold again. Didn't Frank just slip on the ice? Didn't he heal? Weren't the spring seeds planted? Didn't the night end? Didn't the melting ice flood the narrow gutters? Wasn't my body rescued? Wasn't it safe? So yeah, just talking about how, like, you know, things are already getting worse again without enough time to recover from the last time. In a way that can be seen as either Persephone speaking or as the poet speaking. Okay, another highlight from the same poem. The notes recur. They hover oddly in anticipation of silence. The ear gets used to them. The eye gets used to disappearances. This was like, when I was like 15, I was like, oh my God, the eye gets used to disappearances. Like, okay. Of my sleep, I remember nothing. When I cried out, my voice soothed me unexpectedly. In the silence of consciousness, I asked myself, why did I reject my life? And I answer, the earth defeats me. Or, but ignorance cannot will knowledge. Ignorance wills something imagined, which believes it exists, which is like, whew. Yeah, again, thinking about, like, I read this during, like, my own adolescent experiences, and I think that's something that, like, maybe the myth of Persephone is warning you about, you know? And I think it was good that I had this line in my brain with me when I went through life. Or this absolutely, Tumblr would have gone wild with this line. He takes her in his arms. He wants to say, I love you, nothing can hurt you. But he thinks this is a lie. So he says in the end, you're dead, nothing can hurt you. Can you not imagine this, like, plastered above, like, a black and white picture of Maddie Healy? Do you not see it? I do. But yeah, that's Averno by Louise Glück. So highly recommend. I think that's all my books so far. I think next on my, like, spooky list, I want to read Only the Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, because he is coming to Austin in November for Texas Book Festival, which I will be volunteering at. So I think it would be fun to, like, be able to get, like, a signed copy of that book there and to have already read it. I also want to read the rest of the Chronicles of Prydain. And I wonder what you guys are reading from the spooky season. Do you have, like, one that you read every year at this time? Do you like reads that are more spooky, completely, like, horror, or just sort of autumnal? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon or whatever, I would really appreciate it. But if not, I still care about you, and I hope that you have a wonderful week. Drink some water, listen to some bluegrass, and I will see you soon.